Once there was a preacher by the name of Ted Haggard who stumbled from the path, or you might even say staggered. He was 1 in a million, or more aptly 1 in 10. Some folks say he put the men in amen. He preached the gospel message of intolerance and self-loathing, and traveled on his wayward way betraying his betrothing. He was the soul of piety and no one doubted him, until he hired a gigolo and used a pseudonym. So he humbly went to counseling, and then 3 weeks later he's born again. Because Ted Haggard is completely heterosexual. Ted Haggard is completely heterosexual.
Hello everybody, welcome to the Atheist Experience. We are live. It is Sunday, June 1st, 2008. That was Ted Haggard is completely heterosexual. My own views on what determines what is ethically proper or not. I only have a couple of kind of adages that I try to apply to my life now. One is that I'd like to believe as many true things and as few false things as possible. And the reason you have to include both of those is because if you just want to believe as many true things as possible, believe everything, because then by definition you'll believe it. But the filtering mechanism that gets rid of the false beliefs is what allows you to make good decisions. It allows you to make decisions that are consistent with reality and not just based, the result of bad reasoning,
wishes,
arguments,
preferences.
Yeah. Hey, I really wish such and such, and so I'm going to act as if it's true. Well, then everybody's a lottery winner if you start thinking like that.
Or a stalker.
The second one is when I'm considering is to acknowledge right off the bat that beliefs are the result of being convinced of the truth or likely truth of a proposition. Beliefs inform your actions, and actions have consequences, both for you and for other people. And so, I ask myself, if everybody else did this, would we be better off or worse off? And there's the possibility that neutral as well. But in general, if we would be better off if everybody did this, then it's something that I think we should not only try to do, but encourage others to do as well.
Yeah, it becomes the rational choice at that point.
In some sense, that you can't get from an is to an ought, which is where we have these big discussions about can science and reason lead us to a proper ethical system, and they get up there and say, well, you can't get from an is to an ought. Well, that's technically true. It's just not really true, because you can get from a handful of ises to an ought. You can get from an is to an ought as long as you have some condition or goal that you're trying to meet.
Yeah, we have get a lot of this going on in like the comments of the blog, where Christians will come up and they'll just proclaim that science can't do things like determine the results of love or kindness or what have you. You can't get there through a scientific understanding of things, and I think that's just complete nonsense. I mean, if all science is, if the meaning of the word science, if you go back to its Latin root, is knowledge, right? And if you can think about things in this sort of rational context, as you've done, where say, all right, would the human race, would everybody be better off if everyone behaved this way or if everyone behaved that way? Right. And just understanding what the consequences of certain actions were, well, you are essentially applying a form of scientific inquiry to that question. Yeah. That question of, well, what is what would be the result if people behaved in a loving, kind, generous manner to each other, or belligerent, unfriendly, manner to one another? What would be the consequences of those kinds of behaviors, dictating how we are in society and culture at large? What would be the results? Well, you can predict the results fairly easily, and say, well, one's better than the other. That's a form of scientific inquiry.
Yeah, I don't need to know what the absolute best or absolute worst action is to be able to take two actions and consequences and figure out which one's better and which one's worse. We often have had discussions when we talk about ethics and morality of, well, you atheists don't believe in anything. You're these moral subjectivists where you can just pick whatever. You don't believe in absolute moral values. Thanks to Dennis, I've actually said freely on the show before, I do accept absolute morals. In that if you take given a situation, and analyze every possible action, one of them eventually has to be the most beneficial, positively beneficial, and least negative, and have the least negative impact on the situation. That would be what I would consider to be the absolute standard for a moral or ethical path. Are we there? No. But I think that's what we should be trying to do. Not find out what the absolute is, but analyze the consequences to figure out how we can gradually move towards that, how we can treat people better, how we can guarantee the rights of every individual. You know, this whole thing about church-state separation, it's not just atheists are offended because you want to put God all over everything. It has nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
It's a divisive, exclusive action to put above the speaker podium, "In God we trust." It was divisive and exclusive when the U.S. Congress did it in the 50s, as the result of this McCarthy era, hey, we don't want to be godless communists, so let's slap God on everything. It was a violation of the First Amendment then. It's just that it's difficult to challenge. And with the Supreme Court makeup, it's going to be more difficult to challenge, not just because of the way they're more likely to rule, but because they keep saying you don't have standing. You can't even bring the case. You can't even bring the objection.
I've always wondered why it's so important to you know, a great many Christians that their religions have to have some sort of governmental validation.
Yeah.
You know, why in the world they can't just be? I mean, there's millions and millions and millions of churches around the country, and they can go and engage in their religious activities there and in their homes, and they can throw picnics and they can do their social activities. And so why they then need to just insist on prayer at football games, and at every single activity suddenly, you know, they want to just
days of prayer.
Yeah, and I think it's this sort of religious showboating that even if you can even look at the Gospels.
Like they never read Matthew 5 where they're told to pray in private.
Yeah, you know, go into your closet or do whatever, and don't listen to the hypocrites on the street corners, that sort of thing.
Don't do your boasting and praying in public like those Pharisees. You know?
Yeah, you pull that one out, and they kind of get annoyed with you whenever. Yeah. So Jesus doesn't want he doesn't want you to pray at the football game where
both teams are praying, by the way. So I mean, you know, what other position could he possibly take other than?
So I've never really understood why.
Cheating.
Once there was a preacher by the name of Ted Haggard who stumbled from the path, or you might even say staggered. He was 1 in a million, or more aptly 1 in 10. Some folks say he put the men in amen.